Hello and welcome, Inspired Podcast community. This is your new episode. My name is Caroline, and my today's guest is Julian Chapman, and I'm so happy that he said yes to our interview. How are you doing today?
Excellent, Caroline. Thanks so much for having me.
Wow, amazing. And I would love to introduce you to the audience, of course. You are a seasoned leadership expert with over 30 years of experience empowering teams and organizations. You are a retired brigadier general in the Canadian Armed Forces. You are now president of Forest and Company. You are known for pioneering innovative thinking in the workplace, helping leaders enhance problem solving and accountability. Your book, The Managerial Leadership Journey, an Unconventional Business Pursuit, was published in May 2022. Welcome to the Inspired Podcast, Julian Chapman.
Thank you very much, Caroline. It's great to be here.
Oh, yes. Let's start with the first question. How has your military experience influenced your approach to leadership in the corporate world?
That is a great question, and I have a unique experience because in my experience in the military, I was a reservist. So, as we say in Canada, I had a foot on the shore and a foot in the canoe. In other words, I had two careers simultaneously. So I was able to mesh the two. But we have in Canada we have a different attitude towards the military. So I never really talked about my military background, but it obviously, as with all of our experiences, it had an impact on how I approach things. So sometimes you get just the business person, and sometimes a little bit of that old soldier comes out. So.
Oh, I love that. Thank you so much for explaining. Now I have a better understanding of what that means. And I would like to know what inspired you to write the managerial leadership journey.
Well, it's a bit of a long story in a sense. During COVID, when COVID first hit, there was this realization, this existential question of how on earth does one add value to one's clients when I'm not packing grocery bags, or I'm not on the front line or anything like that. And so I started writing a weekly missive to all my clients on the things that were happening, things to think about, because we all had a lot of time to think, in theory, during COVID. And so I produced a weekly missive, and so that started me on the path of writing, because I never really, I was much more of a voice oriented leader rather than a writing leader. And it gave me the experience of getting used to writing. And then someone suggested, actually a publisher suggested, you should write a book. And my idea was that I would take all of these missives that I had written. That was probably about a year and a half of missives already, and try and turn that into a book. Unfortunately, what I found was there was no thread. So I had to start from scratch. So I started from scratch and wrote a book around what I saw were some issues that never really get dealt with in the nature of managerial leadership development. So that was the driving force behind it.
Oh, I love that. Thank you so much for sharing. And I witnessed many projects that started during COVID. We did things differently, and you pointed out how to add value to your customers or clients if you are not in the front line. So I had these images in mind about the grocery store when you talked about it. But this is so true. And also that you share this wisdom or your experiences, of course, that helps many other people, or not just people, leading people, right? And it's so amazing. So thank you so much for doing this. And how does thinking in the workplace enhance team problem solving?
Well, it's interesting, and this is one of the pieces that I mentioned in the book, but I've said for ages, is that thinking is how we do things in the workplace, but we don't actually spend any time thinking about thinking. we go very much to doing something, but not how we move ourselves to do something. So thinking is critical. And I often say when I'm up in front of a crowd, how much of your paycheck is actually for your thinking? And that's a moment where people pause and they go, actually, it's all of my paycheck is based on my thinking. So why not get good at thinking? And as I will often say as well, that when we go through our education process teaches us what to think, not how to think. And so over 20 years ago, I was introduced to a tool and to an expert in thinking who introduced a whole panoply of opportunities around thinking. And so that led me down this path. And it is key. I mean, until we're all we're replaced with robots, everything is going to be about our thinking. And in fact, when it comes to topics like artificial intelligence these days or robotics, how do we set up our artificial intelligence? How do we set up our robots is going to require our thinking.
Yes. Thank you so much for sharing. I'm deeply impressed now. You witnessed this. It's so true. It's not so school teaches us what to think, not how to think. I heard it before. Not for me, it was 3 years ago, not 20 years, but yeah. So I think we have the same coach and mentor. And this would be my next question. Do you have coaches and mentors for yourself? And who was the best coach you ever had?
Well, I suppose the person that had the most impact on me and particularly my thinking is a fellow by the name of Jerry Rhodes in the UK. And he created a construct called effective intelligence. And I over the years, I've spent a lot of time with Jerry to understand the nature of thinking and to understand those elements. And I use thinking as an example. When I say thinking, I mean, how do we use our whole self to do something? Because sometimes when people think of thinking, they think in the narrow, purely cognitive realm. But how do our emotions impact our thinking? And as we're finding out more and more, there's a sea of research now that is suggesting that we truly think from our gut, and the impact that has, not just necessarily from our brain. So Jerry introduced me to a way of understanding and an ability to build frameworks for people. Take, for example, decision making. And this goes back to my point about we're not taught how to think. Interestingly enough, very few people are actually taught how to make a decision. Yet every day, in every way, we're making decisions. And so if I don't have a framework for the decisions that I make, am I confident with the decisions that I make? And in turn, when I present you my decision, if I don't have a framework to explain it to you, are you confident with the decision that I've made? And I find that this is a real issue for leaders, because in our research, and we've researched thousands of leaders now, I have yet to find two people with exactly the same thinking profile in the same organization. Statistically, we'll get there someday. But what that means is that thinking is the ultimate diversity. It is the core of diversity of all of us. And we all think differently. We see different things, or we see the same things, but we think about them, we process them very differently. So that's why frameworks are so valuable to organizations. And back to the point around leaders, is leaders will think differently about something, and they'll give a task to an employee, and that employee will do it differently because they think differently. And so part of that is creating an understanding of different ways of thinking through things.
Now I have a lot to think. Thank you so much. I never thought of it that way when you pointed that out, but it makes totally sense. So what you said, yes, thinking is not just mental activity. I know you did not use these words, but it is in my vocabulary. And I'm so happy that you introduced me to the concept of framework combined with thinking. I never heard it before, I can tell you. I would say, and I have to ask this as a question, what would you say is framework the same as vision or goal?
Well, those are elements of thinking, actually. So a framework is how do I utilize different styles of thinking in order to be able to do something? That's my intent behind framework. But a vision is one type of thinking, having an image of the future. A goal is actually slightly different than a vision in our parlance, at any rate, in that a goal is something that I like and I'm going towards, whereas a vision can just come to me in a moment, the eureka moment. I'm standing in the shower and I have this image and I imagine this thing comes towards me. And interestingly enough, and this may be of value for you, that inspiring people requires a certain type of thinking. It requires us to be able to paint that picture and breathe. And the root of inspire is breathe life, inspiration, right? It's breathing in. And so it's giving people that energy. And that's a form of thinking, just as much as looking at specific facts or data or looking for flaws or distinguishing patterns. Those are all different types of thinking.
Oh, I love that. And there is literature also about that. I heard, or I was reminded yesterday of this book. What is it called in English? Fast thinking and slow thinking. The yes,
Right.
it's the English title. I was reminded of that, and yeah, I'm happy that there is so much to explore still. And also, you mentioned the art. Let's say the art of decision making, right? And I implemented. So there is a difference between decision making or decision and choice. And I named this podcast Inspired Choice because we have the choice. And also, and now comes the thing, we have to choose how we think.
That's
And
right. Exactly. It's hard to choose how we think in our understanding of thinking. It's hard to choose what we think if we don't have a framework or a language for thinking. It's because words are merely analogies for thoughts. But there are words that we all use, but they have different meaning to us because we all think about it differently. And so one of the biggest difficulties, and I'm sure you'll appreciate this, English is a very messy language. Right? And then on top of the fact that take a word like wind, WIND, can be wind and it can be wind, two totally different things, the same word meaning completely different things. So we have that problem, but then we also have words like decision making, because people think of decision making as problem solving, but problem solving is a different form. It's about, and it requires different thinking to do problem solving than to make a decision, which is to choose one thing and reject all the others. And
yes,
so an inspired choice is choosing that one thing that inspires you, but you also have to reject all the others.
yes, the difference. So someone explained it to me. The difference between decision and choice is a choice is I can choose it today, and I can unchoose it tomorrow, or I can, it's not the cut off like you said. It's burning the boats. When you make a decision, it has the word cut or like a scissor or something in it. Of course, we study languages. We love that, and also, so I love your concept. Really, I love it about framework. I never heard of this in the context of thinking. I think I have a glimpse of what you mean by that. The vocabulary as well. You talked about language. It's so important to set your thinking into a framework. And I thought of it as the vision, because like when you think, this is what I do when I think. I always think, is it aligned with my goals? Does it serve me? Does this thought serve me, in order, when I focus from my goal, from my goal to the now moment. It's like re-engineering. This is what I do. But and I love that you mentioned the different perspectives that people have, and especially in the work environment, of course, when it's important to work in with teams, to harmonize, let's say, harmonize,
Right.
that it's like a dance, like they work like as if they were dancing, and it's harmonized. So different problem solving and decision making is not problem solving. I never thought of it before. It is first you make the decision, and then the way shows up. The solution shows up because you made this decision. So it's so much more easier than most people think, right?
Right, exactly. And I find that it surprised me initially that people didn't have frameworks for decisions. And you can find out whether someone has a framework or not when you ask them, so how do you make a decision? And they pause and they're not sure. And some will say, well, I make it from my gut, or it's what's important to me, but they don't necessarily have that framework. Just as I've found recently that planning's another. People don't have a framework for planning. It's a word, it's used all the time, but how do I actually plan? How do I think through a plan and think up what it is that I'm trying to do? And planning and decision making require different thinking.
Yes, it goes hand in hand, so to say. And I would like to mention at this point our business Bible, Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill, because there is the framework. I would say the 13 steps to riches, of course. And now my last question to you, of course, it is combined, asking about your goals and intentions, and what is one of your next projects, but also where can people find you when they want to reach out after listening to this episode?
Well, I would say that the mission of my company, Forrest and Company, is to create great places to work that deliver on the strategy. So it's the tension between the people and the task. But one of the things that I'm very involved with right now is the notion of human flourishing. So how do we as human beings flourish? And we live in challenging times. We live in very challenging times. So how does humanity flourish? And that's humanity flourishing in the conflicts of the world, but also how does humanity flourish in the face of things like artificial intelligence? And this movement around flourishing is picking up more and more steam as we go forward. And I'm not quite sure why. It absolutely should be picking up steam, but I'm not sure what's really driving it. And I would suggest that part of that may be the post-COVID era. My business partner came up with a great line, and that is that in COVID, not everything changed, but everybody did. So people are thinking very differently. They have different values, different things that are important to them. So how can you flourish, and how do you create places where people flourish, whether that's in schools for young children, or whether that's in the workplace, and ensuring that people flourish in the workplace? Because there is a direct return on investment when people are flourishing in the workplace. Companies grow and do well and achieve their strategy. If they're not flourishing, it definitely is a problem, and it will in effect have an impact on business. It will have an impact on education, on the lives of the future. So that's my future project. As we're into the prospect of the new year, that's where the focus is. And where you can find me, well, a simple Google search on Julian Chapman will find me. But you can find me at two places. Our company website is forestandco.com. So that's forest with two R's. As well, I have a website for my book, the managerialleadershipjourney.com. So managerialleadershipjourney.com. And then finally, I continue to write my missives, and they're republished every week on LinkedIn. So you can find me on LinkedIn, Julian C. Chapman. So
thank you so much for sharing. This was a great interview. I learned so much, I can tell you. I will think about my framework of thinking and of all the things we talked about. I have to re-listen to this episode again, of course. And now is time for your final thoughts to the audience, please.
well, final thoughts. I think about your thinking is the most important thing. Pause, reflect, and use your thinking to help you to flourish.
Thank you so much. I'm highly inspired now.
Well, thank you, Caroline.
And
Thank you for having me.
see you in the next episode.